The night was quiet, too quiet for the storm about to erupt. City lights flickered against the wet pavement, reflections stretching like broken glass across the streets. Somewhere, not far from the hum of late-night traffic, the air was heavy with an unspoken tension, the kind that makes your chest tighten before you even know why. And then chaos. Imagine this. A decorated U.S. Army general, a woman who had climbed every rung of the ladder through grit, discipline, and brilliance, suddenly finds herself staring at the unthinkable. Red and blue lights slash the darkness. Sirens howl. The screech of tires cuts through the silence like a blade. And out of that fury come officers. Faces hardened, jaws clenched, authority dripping from every syllable they bark. But authority can turn rotten, can't it? That night it did. Because instead of respect, they saw color. Instead of rank, they saw gender. Instead of honor, they saw nothing at all. Yes, racist cops, blinded by prejudice, handcuffed a black female general as though she were nothing more than a threat on the street. They pushed her against the cold steel of the squad car, wrists bound, dignity stripped away. The very hands that had saluted the flag, that had signed orders protecting the nation, now trembled against metal cuffs, shackled not by law, but by ignorance. And here's the twist. That single act of arrogance, of blatant disrespect, triggered a chain reaction none of those officers could have imagined. Because in the midst of humiliation, in the midst of pain, the general did what generals do. She acted. And one phone call to the Pentagon would soon erase their badges, their reputations, their futures. But before we unravel this electrifying story, pause. If you're here, if you're listening, if you've already felt the chill of this opening scene, then you know this is no ordinary tale. This is the kind of story that makes you question everything: power, justice, identity. So, do this right now. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like, and drop a comment below about what you'd do if you saw injustice happen right in front of you. Would you speak up? Would you stay silent? Tell me. I want to hear your voice. This story is just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss where it goes. Now let's roll the film. The general's name was whispered in military circles with reverence. A trailblazer, she wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol. For decades, she had walked into rooms where she didn't belong, rooms dominated by men, by skeptics, by doubters. And every single time, she walked out having earned respect. Her uniform wasn't just stitched with medals. It was stitched with stories, scars, and sleepless nights. Yet that night, on an unassuming street corner, none of it mattered. To those cops, she wasn't a general. She was simply black, simply a woman. And in their eyes, that was enough to strip her of her humanity. "Step out of the vehicle," one officer barked, his hand already hovering near his holster. His tone wasn't one of procedure. It was venom, laced with something darker than suspicion. She complied, calm but wary. She knew these encounters. She'd read reports, seen the footage of countless victims. But knowing and living are two different beasts. The adrenaline hit her bloodstream like a flood. "What's the problem, officer?" she asked, voice steady. Years of military command had taught her composure, even in firestorms. "Don't question me," he snapped. "Hands where I can see them." A crowd was forming. Phones came out, the glow of screens capturing history in real time. One cop grabbed her wrist, twisting it hard. She winced but didn't cry out. Another shoved her against the hood, cold metal biting through her uniform. Gasps echoed from the onlookers. And then click. The sound of handcuffs. Final. Irreversible. For a second, the world seemed to stop. Was this real? A U.S. general in handcuffs, treated like a criminal by the very people sworn to protect. Whispers shot through the crowd. Some shouted in outrage. Others watched in disbelief. But the officers didn't waver. Their eyes burned with the intoxication of unchecked power. She could feel her pulse pounding. Memories flashed: boot camps, battlefield orders, late-night strategy rooms in the Pentagon. The faces of young soldiers who had followed her into impossible missions, trusting her leadership, her judgment. She had carried the weight of responsibility heavier than most could imagine. And now these men, these cops, dared to reduce her to nothing. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, voice sharp, commanding, her general's tone slipping through despite the cuffs. They laughed. They actually laughed. "We don't care who you are. You're under arrest." The arrogance was staggering. But arrogance has a way of blinding men to their downfall. Because the woman they had just shackled wasn't a random civilian. She was a storm contained in human form. She had access, connections, and authority that reached into the highest corridors of power. And within minutes, that power would be unleashed. Still pressed against the car, she steadied her breath. Her mind was already working, gears turning. She needed just one thing, her phone. When the moment came, when they loosened their grip even slightly, she seized it. Swift, deliberate, she dialed a number burned into memory. The line clicked. A voice answered, low and professional. "Pentagon operations." "Patch me through," she commanded, voice sharp as steel. "This is General." And in that instant, the officers froze. They heard it. They processed it. And for the first time, doubt flickered in their eyes. But it was too late. Too late to undo the cuffs. Too late to rewrite the scene. Too late to stop the tidal wave that had just been set in motion. Because at the other end of that call, men and women in the Pentagon weren't just listening. They were moving. Protocols were breaking. Red phones were lighting up. And careers, police careers, were seconds away from being incinerated. This is just the beginning. The full story will stretch far beyond this moment. Through the Pentagon's reaction, the unraveling of the officers' futures, and the ripple effect that would shake the city. The silence after her words was deafening. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe but suffocates. The crowd of bystanders, phones still raised, seemed to sense it too. That something monumental had just shifted. The general's voice, cold and precise, wasn't a plea. It was a command. And at the Pentagon, commands carry weight. "Confirmed identity," the operator said briskly, transferring the call. Within seconds, she was patched through to a senior officer who recognized her immediately. His tone sharpened, his composure dropping like a mask. "Ma'am, what's your situation?" She inhaled, fighting the indignity of the cuffs biting her skin. "I am detained, improperly, by local law enforcement officers who have no idea who they're dealing with." Her voice was steady, lethal, the kind of voice that had ordered soldiers into battlefields halfway across the globe. The Pentagon official didn't hesitate. "Understood. Stay on the line. We'll handle it." And with that, the machinery of the most powerful military command center in the world roared to life. Back at the scene, the cops hadn't caught up yet. They still believed they had the upper hand. One officer, broad-shouldered and smug, leaned in close, sneering. "Whoever you think you are, it won't save you tonight." His words dripped arrogance, but his eyes betrayed something else. A flicker of unease, the kind that creeps in when instincts whisper danger but pride smothers the warning. The crowd pressed closer. "She said Pentagon," someone shouted. "You idiots know what that means?" Another voice cut through. "That's a general, man. You can't just cuff her like that." Phones kept rolling, live streams ticking upward as viewers flooded in, comments exploding across feeds. "No way this is real. Who is she? This is about to blow up." And blow up it did. Two black SUVs barreled down the street, engines growling like predators closing in. The kind of vehicles that don't ask permission, they take it. Doors flung open and out stepped men in suits, earpieces glinting under the streetlights. Their presence was a declaration. This wasn't just another police stop. This was a battlefield of reputations, and the cops were already losing. "Release her. Now." The words were flat, calm, but carried the force of an avalanche. The lead agent's badge flashed under the neon glow, one the officers instantly recognized, Pentagon liaison. For a moment, the cops hesitated. Pride wrestled with fear, arrogance with reality. Then, like a dam breaking, the weight of their mistake crashed in. Hands fumbled for keys. The metallic click of the cuffs opening rang louder than a gunshot. The general flexed her wrists, slow and deliberate, eyes locked on the officers with the kind of stare that strips a soul bare. "You've made the biggest mistake of your lives," she said softly. Not a threat. Prophecy. The agents shielded her instantly, forming a wall between her and the officers. One agent leaned in close to the lead cop, his words barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut steel. Your careers are over. You'll be lucky if you still have a paycheck by morning. The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, gasps, all blending into a cacophony of disbelief and vindication. Cameras caught every second, every expression, every bead of sweat on the officers' brows. This was no longer a routine arrest. It was a spectacle, a scandal in the making, a story that would travel from that street corner to every news channel in the nation. Back at the Pentagon, phones were still ringing. Memos were being drafted. Internal investigations sparked like brushfires. A general had been humiliated on camera by law enforcement, and the Pentagon wasn't going to let it slide. Meanwhile, the officers were corralled by their own supervisors, summoned to the precinct with urgency that bordered on panic. They didn't even get a chance to justify themselves on the scene. The agents made sure of it. The general, now seated inside the safety of the SUV, dialed once more. This time, her tone carried not just authority, but fire. I want accountability. Immediate. Public. No one humiliates a U.S. general and walks away. Her words echoed not only in the ears of Pentagon brass but across the internet. Clips were already viral. Hashtags multiplying like wildfire. Hashtag justice for the general. Hashtag cuffed for nothing. Hashtag power and prejudice. Within hours, the story would dominate headlines. By morning, anchors would replay the footage on loop, dissecting every frame, every word. And the cops? Their world was collapsing in slow motion. Each officer sat in a sterile conference room, stripped of bravado, stripped of certainty. Higher-ups glared across the table, eyes cold, documents stacked high. Do you have any idea who you just arrested? One superior growled, slamming a folder shut. A general. A goddamn general. You've embarrassed the department, the city, the entire system. Excuses tumbled out. She didn't identify herself properly. We thought she was resisting. We were just following protocol. But none of it mattered. The truth was simple. Racism had clouded their judgment. Arrogance had sealed their fate. By dawn, suspension papers were drafted. Internal Affairs was breathing down their necks. Legal teams prepped for lawsuits that would drag their names through the mud. Reporters camped outside the station, microphones ready, cameras rolling. Their faces were no longer just cops. They were symbols. Symbols of everything broken, everything wrong with power unchecked. And through it all, the general remained composed, untouchable. She gave a brief statement to the press, her words sharp as a blade. No officer is above accountability. No citizen is beneath dignity. Last night, lines were crossed. But let this be clear, those lines will not go unpunished. The crowd roared. The internet exploded. And somewhere, in the hollow silence of a precinct office, the officers realized it. Their careers weren't just damaged, they were obliterated. And this was only the beginning, because while the fallout scorched their futures, the story was about to spread further, into living rooms, into political chambers, into the very heart of a nation already divided. What began as one night of arrogance was spiraling into a national reckoning, and the storm was just getting started. Morning came like an ambush. By the time the sun burned through the haze of dawn, the footage had already circled the globe. Every major network plastered the video across their screens. Grainy phone recordings of a general in cuffs, face pressed against cold steel, the unmistakable clink of shackles echoing through the night. The caption screamed outrage. General arrested. Abuse of power? Racism on full display? News anchors leaned forward in their chairs, voices urgent, tones incredulous. This isn't just any civilian, one declared. This is a decorated general, a woman who has served her country with distinction. And last night, she was treated like a criminal. Panels debated endlessly. Analysts dissected every frame, every officer's gesture, every twitch of the general's face. On social media, the storm was even fiercer. Hashtags dominated the trending list. Hashtag cuff general, hashtag justice now, hashtag power versus prejudice. Memes, think pieces, live debates, all erupting within hours. The footage became more than evidence. It became ammunition in a cultural war already raging in America. One viral tweet read, "If they can do this to a general, what do you think they'll do to the rest of us?" Another countered, "Rank doesn't matter when racism drives the badge." Threads spun into thousands of replies, influencers weighed in, and the story swelled like a tidal wave. But while the internet raged, politicians smelled opportunity. Within 24 hours, podiums across Washington lit up. Senators condemned the act, their voices booming with righteous fury, while others tried to soften the blow, calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding. Yet no one could escape the reality. America had just witnessed its own hypocrisy play out in vivid color. The general herself stood at the epicenter. That morning, she walked out of her temporary quarters at a Pentagon-secured facility. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted questions, microphones nearly shoved in her face. She raised a hand, silencing the noise, her presence commanding even amidst chaos. Her statement was brief, but unforgettable. "Last night I was handcuffed not because of what I had done, but because of who I am. Black, female, unapologetically both. That was my crime in the eyes of those officers. But understand this, what happened to me is not an isolated case. It is the daily reality for countless citizens who do not wear stars on their shoulders. And it must end. Now." The crowd erupted. Reporters scrambled to capture every word, every syllable. Within minutes, her speech was everywhere. Clips looped on television. Transcripts filled articles. Her face became a symbol, an icon of both strength and injustice. And with that, the story transcended her. It wasn't just about a general anymore. It was about the nation itself. In precincts across the country, cops felt the backlash. Protesters flooded the streets, holding signs that read, "If not her, then who's safe?" And "No more immunity." In city halls, mayors demanded reforms. Police chiefs faced relentless scrutiny. Every officer in America knew the message. Accountability was no longer optional. Meanwhile, the officers who had cuffed her became pariahs overnight. Their names leaked, their photos plastered across headlines. Former friends unfollowed them. Families received threats. Neighbors whispered. They were no longer officers. They were villains, cautionary tales of hubris and hate. In the smoky backrooms of politics, the incident became a chess piece. Some sought to champion her as the embodiment of progress. Others quietly plotted to undermine her, fearing the tidal wave of change she represented. But whatever the side, no one could deny it. She had become larger than life. And the Pentagon? Oh, the Pentagon moved with precision. Behind closed doors, investigations churned. Reports were drafted. Quietly, the general's allies ensured her protection, not just physically, but reputationally. They knew the world was watching, and in this battle of optics, losing was not an option. Her phone rang constantly, calls from fellow generals, from senators, from activists she had never met. Each voice carried the same message: "We stand with you." But with each word of support, the weight grew heavier. Because now, she wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol, and symbols don't get to rest. One night, as she sat alone in her quarters, she reflected on the irony. She had led troops into war zones, stared down enemies with guns drawn, made life-or-death decisions that haunted her dreams. Yet it was here, in her own country, on her own streets, where she had faced the deepest wound. The memory replayed in her mind, the snap of the cuffs, the laughter of the officers, the sting of humiliation. It wasn't just an insult to her. It was an insult to every soldier, every citizen who believed in the promise of justice. And that promise, she decided, was now her mission. She began drafting a plan. Not a military strategy, but a cultural offensive. She would speak. She would travel. She would testify. She would drag the shadows into light. Because if her humiliation could ignite a firestorm, Then she would ensure the flames burned long enough to scorch the roots of injustice. Meanwhile, the officer's downfall accelerated. Internal Affairs released its preliminary findings. Racial bias evident, excessive force undeniable, conduct unbecoming. Local politicians scrambled to distance themselves. The mayor issued a statement condemning the act, her tone dripping with urgency. Our city will not tolerate this kind of behavior. Effective immediately, these officers are relieved of duty pending termination. The press devoured it. Headlines blared, cops fired after handcuffing general. Justice served? A nation reckons with racism again. But the story didn't end with their firing. It was only fuel, because the conversation had shifted from these officers to the system itself. Were they symptoms or were they the disease? That question split the nation in half, voices clashing across dinner tables, talk shows, and rallies. The general, meanwhile, remained poised. In interviews, she didn't just recount the night. She framed it. She drew lines connecting her experience to those of civilians killed, silenced, forgotten. She refused to let her rank shield her from solidarity. If this can happen to me, she repeated, then what hope does the average citizen have? And with that, she became unstoppable. A movement was forming, raw and furious, with her face at its front. And the world, whether ready or not, was being forced to confront itself. The streets pulsed with anger. By the third night after the incident, protests erupted in over a dozen cities. What began as a spark on a dimly lit street had exploded into a wildfire that no one could control. Hand-painted signs bobbed through seas of people. Her today, us tomorrow. Justice can't wait. Protect and respect. Chants echoed off skyscrapers, reverberating through neighborhoods, spilling from television screens into the living rooms of America. The footage of her arrest played on massive projectors hung above protest stages. Every time the cuffs snapped shut in the video, the crowd roared in outrage. But what fueled the fire most wasn't just the injustice. It was the identity of the woman who endured it. A general, a war hero, a leader whose life was built on serving a country that, in one careless moment, had humiliated her. And she didn't hide. No, unlike so many caught in scandal, she stepped into the blaze willingly. Her first rally was in Washington, D.C. Thousands flooded the National Mall. Faces lit by candlelight, voices carrying into the night sky. When she took the stage, silence fell like a curtain. The general, uniform sharp, medals gleaming under the floodlights, stood before them not as a victim, but as a warrior. They thought they could strip me of my dignity, she began, her voice booming through speakers. But what they stripped instead was their own mask, revealing the truth we've all known. That injustice lives among us, thriving in plain sight. They tried to chain me, but all they did was unleash us. The crowd erupted, fists raised, chants reverberating. No more cuffs! No more cuffs! Her words spread faster than wildfire. Within hours, clips of her speech had gone viral. Late-night hosts replayed her declaration. Musicians sampled her lines into protest anthems. Students scribbled her quotes on classroom walls. She had become more than a general. She was the embodiment of defiance. But with fame came fury. Opposition forces rose quickly. Critics painted her as a political opportunist, others as a dangerous radical, using her rank to shame law enforcement. On cable news, debates turned venomous. Was this truly racism, or just a misunderstanding? Pundits sneered. Should a general be immune from basic police authority? Their words poured fuel on both sides of the firestorm, and the nation split deeper. Yet on the streets, her supporters outnumbered the skeptics. Each city she visited swelled with tens of thousands. She marched shoulder to shoulder with ordinary citizens, refusing VIP treatment, refusing barricades. She lifted the signs of grieving mothers, held the hands of children carrying portraits of lost brothers, whispered encouragement into ears that had waited years to be heard. One night in Chicago, she joined a candlelit vigil. A mother pressed a photo of her son, killed in a police encounter, into her hands. Tears glistened on both faces. Cameras caught the moment, and it became the cover of every major newspaper. the general kneeling beside a grieving mother, head bowed, flame flickering between them. It was raw, human, undeniable. But behind the scenes, the stakes grew higher. Lawmakers convened emergency meetings. Bills were rushed to the floor, some calling for sweeping police reform, others aiming to reinforce the authority of law enforcement in the face of attacks. Lobbyists lined the hallways of Capitol Hill, money flowing like water, influence traded like cards. And in the Pentagon, whispers grew louder. Some commanders admired her bravery. Others worried she was becoming too political, too visible. A general, after all, was supposed to embody unity, not division. But she didn't flinch. She reminded anyone who questioned her, "I swore an oath to protect this nation, and that includes protecting it from the rot within." Her rallies only grew bolder. In Atlanta, she delivered a fiery speech from the steps of the state capitol, declaring, "This is not just about me. This is about a system that believes power is license. But hear me now, power without accountability is tyranny. And tyranny has no place in our streets." The crowd roared so loud that windows rattled blocks away. But as her voice carried further, the backlash intensified. Police unions staged counter-rallies, insisting the officers had been unfairly judged before investigations concluded. "This is trial by media," one union leader shouted on live TV. Supporters waved blue flags, chanting "Back the Blue" with defiance. Clashes broke out where rallies collided, tensions spilling into physical confrontations. The nation was on edge. Amid the chaos, the general remained unyielding. She gave interviews with calm fire, her tone always walking the razor's edge between fury and poise. When asked if she feared backlash from military superiors, she smirked. "Fear? I faced war zones. This is just another battlefield." Her metaphor stuck. Protesters began calling themselves soldiers of justice, carrying signs that read, "Marching under her command." Movements rarely find leaders who can crystallize rage into action, grief into solidarity. She had become that leader whether she intended to or not. In one breathtaking moment, she stood before a crowd of 50,000 in New York City's Times Square. Screens the size of buildings displayed her image, uniform gleaming, eyes fierce. She raised her fist and declared, "They tried to silence me with chains, but chains don't silence. Chains ring loud enough to wake a nation. And we will not go back to sleep." The sound was thunder. The city shook with chants, drums, car horns joining the chorus. Strangers embraced. Tears streamed down faces. For many, it was the first time they believed change might actually come. But in the shadows, her enemies plotted. Politicians whispered strategies to discredit her. Anonymous leaks hinted at digging into her past, searching for any imperfection that could be magnified. Troll armies swarmed her feeds, spreading lies, fabricating scandals. The goal was clear: break the symbol before the symbol broke them. And yet she stood taller, because symbols, once born, are nearly impossible to kill. The night after the Times Square rally, she sat in a quiet hotel room, lights dim, city noise muffled by glass. She replayed the day's footage not for ego, but for resolve. She whispered to herself the words she told so many others. "This isn't about me anymore. This is about all of us." And in that whisper, she knew the fight had only just begun. For the officers, life unraveled with terrifying speed. One day, they were patrolling streets with an iron sense of authority. The next, their names were plastered across headlines, their faces dissected on national television, their personal histories dragged out like dirty laundry for a ravenous public. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. Grocery store aisles became gauntlets of glares. Wives fielded phone calls from friends who just couldn't be associated anymore. Kids came home from school in tears, bullied, mocked, shamed. Their homes, once sanctuaries, now felt like cages surrounded by invisible mobs. "Dad, are you going to jail?" one officer's son asked, his small voice trembling. The man, once proud in uniform, had no answer. He just lowered his face into his hands, crushed beneath the weight of consequences he had never imagined. The internal investigations didn't stop at suspension. They dug deep: body cam footage, prior complaints, disciplinary records, testimonies from citizens who had once been ignored. A dark pattern emerged: racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation. The night of the general's arrest was not an anomaly. It was the culmination of years of unchecked behavior. And now the world saw it all. Local officials, desperate to distance themselves, fed the media with leaks. Every revelation landed like a hammer blow. Officer accused of harassment in 2018. Multiple use of force complaints ignored. Each headline stripped another layer of credibility until nothing remained but the stench of corruption. Meanwhile, the general's star only rose higher. Her every move was broadcast, her words quoted like scripture. She had become untouchable, a figure larger than politics, larger than rank. Her speeches drew crowds that rivaled concerts, her presence igniting hope in some and fury in others. And with her rise came enemies. Whispers turned into campaigns. Anonymous blogs popped up overnight, spreading half-truths, insinuations, character assassinations. They questioned her service record, twisted her decisions in combat into fabrications of failure. Old acquaintances were paraded on talk shows, spitting out rehearsed lines designed to tarnish her reputation. "She's not the hero you think she is," one former officer sneered into a camera. "She's power-hungry, dangerous." But the attempts fell flat. For every lie, supporters produced receipts, evidence, truth. And if anything, the smear campaigns only strengthened her image. People rallied harder, defending her, amplifying her voice. The more they tried to bury her, the higher she soared. Still, the pressure was relentless. She couldn't walk through a hotel lobby without cameras chasing her. Every whisper of her private life became front-page gossip. Did she have family? Was she married? Did she carry secrets that could be weaponized? The scrutiny was invasive, merciless. Yet she bore it like armor, refusing to flinch. In one televised interview, she addressed the smear attempts head-on. Her eyes locked on the camera, her voice unwavering. "They can dig, they can lie, they can claw at shadows. But I don't fear shadows, I've walked through fire. What happened to me wasn't about my flaws. It was about their hatred. And hatred cannot win." The clip went viral instantly. It wasn't just a defense, it was a declaration. She wasn't playing defense anymore. She was waging war. Meanwhile, the officers sank deeper into isolation. One of them, desperate, tried to plead his case on live television. Sitting stiffly in a cheap suit, he muttered about protocol and misunderstandings. But the audience didn't buy it. Call-in lines flooded with outrage. Hashtags ridiculed his excuses. Late-night comedians shredded him mercilessly. Another officer fled town entirely, unable to endure the stares, the threats, the constant weight of shame. But running didn't save him. The internet never forgets, and every move he made was tracked, criticized, mocked. He was no longer a man. He was a meme, an example carved into digital stone. And yet, as the cops' lives crumbled, forces against the general tightened. Politicians who felt threatened by her growing influence whispered in corridors of power. "She's stepping out of line," they hissed. "A general should not be leading a revolution." Think tanks drafted reports painting her as a destabilizing force. Commentators began weaving narratives about dangerous militarization of activism. The irony was bitter. The very institution that had saved her, the Pentagon, now contained voices that wanted her silenced. She knew it. She felt the eyes watching, the whispers circling. But instead of retreating, she leaned in harder. She announced a nationwide tour, town halls, marches, speeches. "If they want to call me dangerous," she declared at a rally, "then I will be dangerous. Dangerous to corruption. Dangerous to prejudice. Dangerous to silence." The crowd erupted, chanting her name, their voices echoing into the night. But in dimly lit offices, enemies drafted countermeasures. Some called for formal inquiries into her conduct. Others plotted leaks to stain her credibility. And in the darkest corners, threats began to emerge, real threats. Emails laced with hatred, letters laced with menace. Security around her tightened, but she refused to live in fear. She told her team, "If I back down now, every word I've spoken means nothing. I'd rather fall standing than live kneeling." And so, the stage was set. On one side, a fallen group of officers whose arrogance had destroyed them. On the other, a general rising into legend. Between them, a nation divided, a system under siege, and a storm that showed no sign of slowing. The battle lines had been drawn, not just on the streets, but in the very soul of the country. And the general knew this fight was far from over. Power, once challenged, never sits quietly. By the time the general's rallies drew millions across the country, whispers inside the halls of government had hardened into action. She was no longer just an inconvenient figurehead for protesters. She was becoming a threat to the order, a destabilizing force that politicians and power brokers could not afford to ignore. In Washington, meetings stretched late into the night. Behind closed doors, strategy memos circulated with words like containment, surveillance, and damage control. Committees convened under the guise of national security concerns, but everyone in the room knew the truth. They weren't protecting the country. They were protecting themselves from her. "She's wielding too much influence," one senator barked, slamming his fist on a mahogany table. "Crowds of 50,000 hanging on her every word? She's not just a general anymore. She's a movement, and movements are dangerous." Across the table, a Pentagon official leaned forward, voice lower but no less sharp. "She's still one of us. Attacking her directly will backfire. But monitoring her, quietly ensuring she doesn't cross certain lines, that we can do." And so, the machinery of surveillance turned its gaze upon her. Unmarked vans appeared near her rallies, antennae disguised as ordinary equipment. Phones buzzed with strange interference. Emails vanished, then reappeared. Her closest advisors noticed shadows that lingered too long, faces that turned away too quickly. "She's being watched," one aide whispered nervously after finding a wiretap hidden in the ventilation of their rented office. "They're tracking everything we do." The general wasn't surprised. She'd seen it before. Foreign leaders monitored, activists silenced, whistleblowers hunted. But it was different when the target was herself. Different yet expected. She addressed her team with calm steel. "If they want to watch, let them. We'll give them a show they'll never forget." Meanwhile, her enemies escalated in subtler ways. Anonymous leaks about her temper circulated in the press. Editorials questioned her loyalty, hinting at military overreach and blurred lines between command and activism. Talk shows replayed doctored clips to paint her as aggressive, manipulative. The narrative was shifting, not enough to erase her support, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in those on the fence. Still, the crowds kept coming. In Los Angeles, a rally spilled onto freeways, halting traffic for miles. In Philadelphia, protesters chained themselves to courthouse steps, chanting her name into the night. The air was electric, restless, unstoppable. But the general knew electricity could be dangerous if mishandled. She worried about violence breaking out, about opportunists twisting the cause into chaos. She pleaded with her supporters, "Our power is in discipline. Do not let rage destroy the very message we carry." Yet across town, a different kind of discipline was being sharpened. Intelligence reports flowed across government desks, filled with transcripts of her calls, lists of her associates, dossiers built on rumors and innuendo. Some factions argued for charging her with insubordination. Others whispered about stripping her rank entirely. But all agreed on one thing: she could not be allowed to keep rising unchecked. And in the shadows, darker plans brewed. A private contractor, hired quietly through layers of deniability, offered solutions: discrediting campaigns, character assassination, controlled leaks, psychological pressure. The language was clinical, cold, detached. But the goal was obvious: break her before she became untouchable. The general, however, was not naive. She anticipated their moves, often staying a step ahead. When false stories hit the press, she countered with evidence. When surveillance tightened, she used it to her advantage, calling out the watchers, exposing their presence in front of cameras. "If they're so afraid of me," she declared at one rally, pointing to an unmarked van, "ask yourselves why. What is it they fear? Truth. That's all it is, truth." The crowd roared, chanting louder, forcing the van to retreat under jeers. Inside government halls, frustration mounted. "She's turning even surveillance into a weapon," a furious advisor groaned. "Every time we push, she grows stronger." But cracks began to appear in her armor too. The constant travel, endless speeches, and relentless scrutiny gnawed at her. Nights were sleepless, mornings heavy. She missed meals, missed rest, missed the simple silence of life before all this. She carried herself with dignity, but behind closed doors, fatigue draped her like lead. Her team worried. "You need to slow down," one aide begged. "If you burn out, this entire movement collapses." But the general shook her head, eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. "Movements don't wait. Justice doesn't wait. And I won't wait either." Still, the dangers grew closer. One night, after a rally in Houston, her motorcade was forced to a sudden stop. Tires shredded by spikes placed deliberately on the road. Dark figures scattered into the night as her security scrambled. Though no one was injured, the message was clear. She wasn't just being watched anymore. She was being targeted. Her advisors panicked, but she remained calm, even defiant. "If they think fear will silence me," she told them, "then they've learned nothing about who I am." News of the incident only added fuel to the fire. Supporters rallied harder, donations poured in, artists painted murals of her with words like fearless and unbreakable. She had become something no smear campaign could touch, a legend in the making. But legends, history has shown, often come at great cost. And the general knew, deep down, that the forces arrayed against her weren't done. They were only sharpening their blades. The stage was set for a collision, not just between her and the officers who had wronged her, not just between her and the system she challenged, but between truth and the machinery of power itself. And when that collision came, it would shake the country to its core. The storm could no longer be contained. What had started as peaceful marches was mutating into something heavier, rawer, more unpredictable. By the 7th week after the incident, America's streets throbbed with tension. In Portland, tear gas hissed through the night as protesters clashed with riot police. In Dallas, streets burned with overturned cars and shattered storefronts. In New York, the National Guard lined avenues where chants of "justice now" collided with the sharp crack of batons against shields. The general had warned them. She had begged her followers to resist violence, to stand tall without turning destructive. "Do not let rage poison the message," she repeated at every rally. But movements, once unleashed, develop lives of their own. And when pain runs deep, when injustice feels endless, patience wears thin. People are angry. One young protester told a news crew, his face streaked with sweat and soot. "We've been angry for years. She gave us the courage to march, but they gave us the reason to fight." Cable news plastered the scenes across the country, splicing footage of burning streets beside the general's fiery speeches. Critics pounced. "See," pundits declared, "she's responsible for this chaos. She may not be lighting fires, but she's the spark." Inside the Pentagon, the pressure reached a boiling point. Meetings turned brutal, voices raised, tempers snapping. Some officers demanded her immediate removal from command. "A general cannot be the face of rebellion," one four-star thundered. "She's blurring the sacred line between military and politics." Others defended her. "She's not leading a rebellion. She's leading the truth. We silence her, and we prove everything she's saying." The divide was no longer whispers. It was war within the walls of power. Meanwhile, the White House could no longer stay silent. The president stepped to the podium, flanked by flags, eyes heavy with calculation. "We are a nation of laws," he began, measured and cold. "And no individual, regardless of rank or reputation, has the right to endanger public order. We urge, General," he paused on her name, almost spitting it, to remember her oath and choose unity over division. The words landed like a thunderclap. Newsrooms erupted. Commentators dissected every syllable. Supporters saw it as a veiled threat. Detractors saw it as validation. And in the middle of it all, the general herself watched from a dimly lit room, jaw tight, heart pounding. "This is it," one aide whispered. "They're forcing you to choose. Career or cause. You can't have both anymore." The general leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. Memories flashed. Her first salute as a young officer, her rise through the ranks, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the endless years of loyalty to the institution now hanging a dagger over her head. And then she remembered the cuffs, the laughter of those cops, the sting of humiliation, the faces of ordinary people who had cried in her arms at rallies, who had begged her not to stop fighting. Her choice, she realized, had already been made. The next day, she stood before cameras at a press conference packed beyond capacity. The air buzzed with anticipation, the weight of history pressing against the walls. She wore her uniform, stars gleaming on her shoulders, but her expression carried a resolve sharper than any medal. "I have served this nation with honor," she began, voice steady but heavy. "I have worn this uniform for decades, believing in the ideals it represents: duty, honor, country. But those ideals mean nothing if we are too afraid to confront the truth. And the truth is this: our system is broken, and silence is complicity." She paused, letting the words hang, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras clicking like machine guns. "I have been told to choose, to remain silent and preserve my career, or to speak and risk it all. Today I make my choice. Effective immediately, I resign my commission." Gasps filled the room. Journalists nearly fell from their chairs. Her aides froze in shock. But she continued, unwavering. "I will not wear these stars while people in this country are shackled by prejudice. I will not salute a system that turns a blind eye to injustice. From this moment on, I fight not as a general but as a citizen. And let me be clear, I will fight louder, stronger, and longer than ever before." The room exploded. Shouts, cries, questions, all drowned beneath the roar of history. The footage spread like wildfire. Networks interrupted programming. Social media melted under the weight of hashtags. Hashtag resignation for justice. Hashtag general no more. Hashtag citizen commander. Her supporters wept with pride. Her critics foamed with rage. And across the country, millions of people felt the ground shift beneath them. That night, protests swelled into something even larger. Cities filled with citizens carrying candles, carrying flags, carrying her words like banners. "Silence is complicity," they chanted, voices echoing across highways and town squares. But while the streets burned brighter with hope, her enemies sharpened their knives. In government backrooms, her resignation was viewed not as surrender but as escalation. "She's free now," one advisor muttered darkly. "She no longer answers to the chain of command. That makes her more dangerous than ever." Plans accelerated. Surveillance tightened. Disinformation campaigns ramped into overdrive. And in hushed corners, conversations turned sinister. "She thinks she's untouchable," a senator whispered over a glass of bourbon. "Maybe it's time she learns otherwise." The general, meanwhile, felt both liberated and exposed. For the first time in decades, she no longer carried the weight of a uniform. She was lighter, freer, but also vulnerable in ways she had never been before. No longer protected by rank, she was a target with no shield but the people's love. And that love was fierce, fiercer than she had imagined. Strangers sent letters, artwork, songs. Veterans reached out, confessing they had never believed in anything until now. Families mailed photos of lost sons and daughters, urging her to keep going. She became not just a leader, but a vessel of grief, hope, and rage, all channeled into one relentless figure. But deep down, she knew what was coming. The system she had just challenged, the same one that had trained her, fed her, promoted her, was not going to let her dismantle it without a fight. And she was ready. Resignation should have ended it. At least that's what many assumed. Without the weight of stars on her shoulders, without the uniform that had once tied her to the institution she challenged, some believed the general's fire would cool. They thought she would fade into the background, a brief headline, a passing storm. They were wrong. Her resignation became gasoline. Overnight, her transformation from general to citizen commander made her even more powerful. She was no longer bound by chains of decorum or protocol. She could speak without filters, act without approval. Her voice, once commanding within the ranks of soldiers, now thundered unrestrained across the nation. Crowds multiplied. Cities swelled with demonstrations not of thousands, but of hundreds of thousands. Drone footage captured seas of people, their chants rolling like earthquakes. Silence is complicity. No more chains. We are the people. But as her influence grew, so did the darkness surrounding her. The surveillance, once subtle, became brazen. Black SUVs idled outside her hotels. Strange men loitered near her rallies, photographing attendees with high-powered lenses. She received anonymous emails describing her movements with chilling accuracy. What she wore, who she met, what she whispered behind closed doors. One night, her phone buzzed with an unmarked video file. Against her team's advice, she opened it. The grainy footage showed her walking into her hotel the previous evening. A red crosshair hovered over her chest. Then the screen cut to black. Her aides panicked. This is a death threat. We need to cancel events, tighten security, move underground. But the general shook her head slowly. If I hide, they win. Every step I take in the open is proof they can't silence me. Let them watch. I'll make sure they never look away. Meanwhile, smear campaigns intensified. Tabloids published salacious rumors about her past, painting her as reckless, unfit, even dangerous. Photos were doctored, speeches edited to twist her words into something sinister. Talk radio blasted her daily, calling her a traitor, agitator, enemy within. But with each attack, her supporters grew more loyal. They saw through the noise, recognizing the playbook of fear. Online, a phrase emerged, repeated like a mantra. If they fear her this much, she must be doing something right. Still, the pressure was relentless. Her team worked around the clock, fielding threats, debunking lies, countering narratives. Exhaustion carved shadows under their eyes, but the general drove them forward. We're in a war, she reminded them. Not of bullets, but of perception. And perception wins nations. And yet, behind her steel exterior, cracks formed. Nights were sleepless. Every knock at the door jolted her awake. Every unfamiliar face in the crowd made her wonder if a bullet was waiting. She didn't show it, but the fear was there, coiled like a snake. Then came the sabotage. In Detroit, a rally nearly ended in tragedy when sound equipment mysteriously overloaded, sending sparks raining across the stage. The general was rushed away as panicked crowds scattered. Investigators called it faulty wiring. Her team called it what it was: sabotage. In Atlanta, her convoy was delayed when every vehicle simultaneously suffered mechanical failures. Later, mechanics found deliberate tampering with fuel lines. In Denver, a hacker infiltrated her live stream, plastering her feed with grotesque images and splicing her words into incoherent rants. The broadcast was hijacked for only 2 minutes, but the damage was enough to dominate headlines for days. Sabotage, surveillance, threats, they're escalating, her head of security warned. It's only a matter of time before they move from psychological warfare to something worse. But the general refused to yield. At her next rally, she stood taller than ever, the crowd vibrating with anticipation. She held up a printed copy of the hijacked broadcast and tore it in half before the cameras. They think lies can break us, she thundered, voice carrying across the square. They think shadows can silence us. But I've walked through fire before, and I'll walk through fire again. Because I am not afraid. And neither should you be. The crowd exploded, a roar so loud it drowned the city itself. The sabotage, intended to weaken her, had only reforged her into something stronger. But in the corridors of power, Fear curdled into desperation. She's untouchable now, one senator muttered to a cabal of officials. Every attempt to smear her only fuels her movement. If we don't stop her soon, she'll change everything. And how do you propose we stop her? Another hissed. Silence hung in the room before one voice, cold and deliberate, cut through. Accidents happen. Cars crash. Fires break out. People disappear. The words chilled even those who had once spoken of silencing her. But none objected, because deep down they knew the battle with her was no longer political. It was existential. The general sensed it too. In a rare moment of candor with her closest aide, she admitted, "They won't stop until I'm gone. Not politically, physically. I can feel it." "Then let us pull back," the aide pleaded. "Let us regroup. You've done enough already." She shook her head. "If I stop now, every person who believed in me will think courage was wasted. And I won't let their faith die." That night, she drafted a speech unlike any she had ever given. One that would not only challenge her enemies but expose them, naming names, tearing masks, dragging shadows into the light. It would be her boldest move yet, and perhaps her last. The night of the speech felt electric, as if the entire nation was holding its breath. Word had spread days in advance. She was preparing to say something that would shake the foundations of power itself. Rumors swirled on social media. Would she resign from public life altogether? Would she call for mass protests? Or would she finally name the faceless enemies who had stalked her since the night she was cuffed? By dusk, the plaza outside the Capitol was overflowing. Tens of thousands pressed shoulder to shoulder, candles flickering in the warm night air, banners rippling in the breeze. Helicopters thudded overhead. News crews from every corner of the world jostled for position. This wasn't just another rally. It was history waiting to be carved into stone. Backstage, the general stood in silence, eyes closed, palms resting on the podium she was about to step behind. Her aide hovered nervously at her side. "Are you sure about this? Once these names are spoken, there's no going back." Her eyes opened, steel gleaming beneath exhaustion. That's the point. No more shadows. Tonight, they faced the light. When she stepped into view, the crowd erupted. The sound was thunder, rolling through the plaza, bouncing off marble walls. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail. The crisp suit she wore instead of a uniform, the steady gait, the calm fire in her eyes. She waited, letting the cheers crest and fall before raising her hand. Silence rippled outward, tense and complete. "My fellow citizens," she began, voice clear as a bell. "For weeks we've marched together. We've spoken truth to power. We've endured lies, sabotage, and threats. And yet we are still here, stronger than ever." The crowd roared, but she lifted her hand again, cutting them off. "Tonight, I will give you the truth they've tried to bury. For too long we've been told that corruption is too vast, too hidden, too powerful to fight. But I have seen their faces. I have read their memos. And I will not stay silent." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready, recorders trembling in their hands. She pulled a sheet of paper from her jacket, unfolding it slowly. Her voice hardened. "Senator Robert Wexler, author of the funding bills that bankroll the very police units terrorizing our communities. Congressman Alan Peters, whose committee diverted oversight funds while lining his own pockets. Defense contractor Lorne Systems, awarded billions to provide surveillance tools now used against citizens, against me, against you." Each name landed like a hammer. The crowd howled in outrage, chants rising and falling. "Shame! Shame! Shame!" But she wasn't done. "And within the Pentagon itself," she continued, voice low, lethal, "officials who swore to defend our nation now conspire against its people. I have evidence, documents, recordings, proof that these men and women plotted to silence me, to smear me, and when that failed, to eliminate me." The plaza erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted over one another. Protesters screamed until their voices cracked. Phones shot into the air, streaming every syllable. On the broadcast feed, Anchors gaped in disbelief. "She's naming names," one whispered. "She's burning bridges to the ground." But the general's fire only grew. "Let them come for me. Let them threaten, sabotage, and smear. Because I will not stop. I will not kneel. And I will not let this nation be strangled by the hands of cowards hiding in marble halls. Tonight, I say this to them directly. I see you. And now, so does the world." The crowd exploded into chants so loud they rattled windows blocks away. "We see you. We see you." The speech ended not with a quiet exit, but with her fist raised high, candles blazing around her like stars fallen to earth. Cameras captured the moment from every angle, a tableau destined to become iconic. The citizen commander calling out the untouchable, daring them to strike back. And strike back they did. Within hours, political offices scrambled into lockdown. Senators issued frantic denials. Lawyers flooded airwaves, threatening lawsuits. Pentagon officials called emergency meetings, voices rising into panic. The president himself was rushed into a secure situation room, advisors buzzing with fury. "She's declared war," one barked. "No," another corrected grimly. "She's exposed it." But the consequences spilled beyond boardrooms. Across the nation, her supporters surged into the streets, emboldened like never before. Marches swelled into sieges, with protesters surrounding government buildings, chanting the names she had revealed. Police lines cracked under the pressure. Clashes broke out, tear gas billowing into night skies lit by fire and fury. The media split down the middle. Some hailed her as a modern-day revolutionary, fearless enough to topple the faceless elite. Others condemned her as reckless, irresponsible, a threat to stability. Op-eds screamed across front pages, "Hero or traitor? The citizen commander goes too far. America at a crossroads." And behind the curtain, her enemies moved quickly. Cyberattacks hammered her organization, crashing donation platforms and flooding communication channels. Anonymous sources funneled doctored evidence to the press, painting her as unstable, even dangerous. Dark money poured into counter-protests designed to fracture her base. But none of it stopped the tidal wave she had unleashed. Because the names were out now, the secrecy was shattered, and millions of people, for the first time, felt they knew exactly who their enemy was. That night, as she sat in a secured location with her team, exhaustion etched into every line of her face, she looked at her aide and whispered, "The line's been crossed. There's no turning back." The aide nodded, eyes wide with fear and awe. "You've set the country on fire." She stared out the window at the city below, streets glowing with protest, chants echoing like war drums. "Then let it burn. Maybe in the ashes, we'll finally find justice." The country felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. After the general's bombshell speech, America stood on the edge of something it hadn't felt in generations: revolution. Streets shook nightly with chants, plazas overflowed with fury and hope, and everywhere, whispers spread. If they try to silence her now, the nation itself will erupt. Her enemies knew it too. That's why the gloves came off. The threats turned from shadows to open daggers. Emails with chilling precision. "We know where you'll be on Tuesday." Anonymous voicemails with gunshots echoing in the background. Security reports confirmed sightings of armed men circling her rallies. Even her hotel room wasn't safe. Once, she returned to find her belongings ransacked, nothing stolen, just rearranged. A message scrawled on the bathroom mirror: "Quit or die." Her team begged her to retreat, to go dark, to live long enough to fight another day. But the general refused. "If I vanish now," she told them, "fear wins. And if fear wins, the people lose." Still, she tightened her circle. Only a handful of trusted aides remained near her. Security doubled, but so did her resolve. She scheduled one final event, a rally in Washington, D.C., right on the steps of the Capitol. Symbolic, dangerous, a direct challenge to the very people she had named. The city braced itself. Barricades lined streets. Riot police stood shoulder to shoulder, and armored vehicles lurked around corners. Tens of thousands poured in anyway, chanting her name, waving signs, daring power to strike them down. Helicopters carved circles in the sky. Every news outlet on Earth turned its cameras toward the Capitol. Backstage, moments before she walked out, her aide gripped her hand. "If something happens," she cut him off, her voice calm, almost tender. "Then let it happen. I'd rather fall fighting than live silent." And then she stepped into the light. The roar of the crowd shook the earth. She raised her hand, and silence rippled outward like a wave. She began her speech, voice steady, each word cutting like steel. "They tried to chain me. They tried to smear me. They tried to scare me into silence. But here I stand, still speaking, still fighting, still unafraid. Because fear is their weapon. Truth is ours." The crowd thundered. Candles flickered. For a moment, it felt like the nation was holding itself together with nothing but her voice. And then the shot. A single crack split the night air. The crowd gasped. Screams erupted. Chaos exploded as people ducked, scattered, stampeded. Security lunged toward her, shields up, eyes wide with panic. The general staggered, clutching her shoulder, blood blooming against her jacket. Cameras caught it all, live, unfiltered, undeniable. Her aide screamed, "Medic, get her out." But she shoved them away, teeth gritted, eyes blazing with fury. Bleeding, shaking, she stumbled back to the microphone. "You see?" she roared, voice ragged but thunderous. "You see how afraid they are? They can fire bullets, but they cannot kill truth. They cannot silence us." The crowd erupted into chaos, then into something greater. Chants rose through the panic. "We are not afraid. We are not afraid." Tens of thousands of voices fused into one defiant roar, drowning out the sirens, the screams, the helicopters. The general collapsed moments later, rushed into an ambulance as cameras followed. The image of her bloodied but unbroken, fist still raised as she was carried away, became immortal overnight. By dawn, the nation was split wide open. Her enemies scrambled to deny involvement, to frame it as the act of a lone, radical extremist. But few believed them. The footage was too raw, the timing too perfect, the symbolism too damning. Protests multiplied tenfold. Millions marched in every major city, chanting her words, carrying her image painted like a saint across banners and murals. Vigils glowed through the night, seas of candles stretching for miles. Whether she lived or died, her message had already transcended flesh and blood. In a secured hospital wing, the general drifted in and out of consciousness. Surgeons worked tirelessly, reporters camped outside, supporters wept in the streets. When she finally opened her eyes, weak but alive, the first words she whispered to her aide were simple. "Tell them, I'm still here." That sentence became the rallying cry of a generation. Within weeks, investigations unraveled networks of corruption she had exposed. Senators resigned under pressure. Contractors were dragged into hearings. Police chiefs toppled. The movement she sparked hardened into policy. Reform bills drafted under the roar of public demand. And the officers, the ones who had cuffed her on that fateful night, their names were etched into history not as protectors, but as the fools whose arrogance had ignited a revolution. Years later, historians would debate whether she had won or merely survived. Politicians would argue about her methods, her rhetoric, her defiance. But none could deny the truth. She had become legend. Because legends aren't measured by medals or titles. They're measured by the fire they leave behind. And hers burned bright enough to light a nation.